Hello everyone, welcome back. So in the previous video, we implemented the sign up and the login UI, and in this video, we're gonna implement Supabase Auth. So now let's see what we have done so far. We have implemented the custom back button. So this is done and the validation is done. Next step is the Supabase setup. So now we're gonna add Supabase into our login and sign up pages. So let me show you the Supabase website. So this is the project I was working with before, but you will need to go to supabase.com, and once you create an account you will be redirected to your dashboard, and there you can create a new project. So let's go to dashboard and create a new project for our application. You will have to choose your organization. So mine is Sayed Naman, so I'll click on this. Then for the project name, I'll choose Super Social App like this. Then type a strong password for your database. Then choose the region, which is obviously in your case closest to your audience, and then create the project. So once the project is created, you can see your service role, anon key, and the project API key, and in the sidebar you can see all the features like database, auth, storage, real time. So we're gonna use all of these in a later, but now let me show you the guide to setups authentication in React Native. So this is a very comprehensive guide. This shows you how you can create the application, create the login components, then implement authentication. We already have created the application, so we just need to install these dependencies. This is the Supabase client library, so I'll just select these and copy them. Let me just close the server and install all of these libraries in here. Okay, so these are installing. Now we already have our login component and the sign up component, so we don't need to create it again. And we just need to create a supabase.ts file in our lib folder, and then have all the configuration there. So let's create lib folder and then supabase.js. Then let's just copy this client configuration. So this code basically creates a Supabase client which we can use to uh, implement authentication. So I'll just copy this and paste this here, and the libraries are installed. So let's run our application. Okay, so now we're gonna get the Supabase URL and the anon key for these variables so that we can create a client. And let me show you how you can get these values. So go into your Supabase project, and there are multiple ways you can get these API keys. So once you create the project, and you'll be redirected to API key section, and there you can find the project key and the anon key here. But if you lost that page, you can go into the sidebar into the project settings, and under the API section you will find the API keys. So you can find the project URL and the anon key. There is one more way to get the API keys. Just go to your home section and click on this connect button, and then click on the mobile framework. This will show you the project URL and the anon key, so you can copy this and paste this into your application. So let's copy the project URL, and let's copy this into our constants. So we already have constants index file, so let me just export a constant here, Supabase URL, and paste the key here. Then let's also export the anon key, so Supabase anon key, and let's copy it from our project. This is the anon key, paste it here and save this. Now we can import these API keys into this file, so we don't really need to have these variables. So let's just remove them and directly import them and use them here. So Supabase URL and the Supabase anon key like this. Okay, so this will create a client for us, and in the bottom here, this is just an event listener for Supabase to auto refresh the token. So let's go to our guide, and we have created the Supabase client. Next step is to create the login component, which we already have. Then we need to use the sign in with password function, and send the email and the password to log in with Supabase. But first we need to sign up the user, so we will use the sign up method and we will pass the email and password, and this will return us a session for that user if the user is created successfully. So we already have the UI, so let's go into our application and implement this sign up. So let's go to application is running, so let's just refresh the app. Okay, the app is running, and let's go to our sign up page. And here, using the Supabase client, we will implement the sign up functionality. So let's go to sign up page, and here in this function we already have the variables, so we will just trim the name, email and the password. So if there are any blank spaces, it will just remove them. So trim the name. Let's copy this 2 more times for the email, and for the password as well. Okay, so this will get rid of the blank spaces. Then we're gonna start the loading because we're going to call the Supabase sign up function. So let's see how we can use this. We're gonna call the sign up function with an object email and password. Then it will return a data and then error in the response. So let's get the data and the error object, and we need to use await supabase.auth. So this is the client that we just created. We need to import this, and then we can use the auth service and then the sign up function. There we go. So this will be a function that will receive email and password in an object like this. So once this is created, we need to console log the data. So let's console log the session, and we can get the session inside the data. So let's get the session like this, and it will show the session. And let's also console log the error if we have any. And in case we get any error, we will want to show an alert box to the user. So we will make a check if there is an error. We will use the alert from React Native. And this will show sign up error as error.message. And finally, we need to stop the loading. So let's stop the loading here, make it false, and let's save this. Now before we test everything, we need to enable the email provider. So if it's not already enabled, go into your authentication service, and in the sidebar you will see providers. So let's just refresh the page. Okay, so in the sidebar you can see the providers. Click on the provider, and by default the email will be enabled, but we need to turn off this confirm email option, because if we don't, it will send a confirm email on the email that we used to sign up, and we need to perform an extra step. I don't want to do that, so we just need to turn it off. And then let's try to register an account, and then hit sign up. So we saw the loading, and in the console we see error as null, and we got the session data. This has the access token. That means our user is logged in and it's successfully registered on the Supabase. So there we can find all the user data. We have the email verified false, phone verified, and the user ID. So we can see this user into the Supabase as well. If you go into the users, you will see all the registered users here. So there it is, the newly registered user. So currently we can only see the users here, but I want to store all the users into a users table. So let's go into table editor and then create a new table. And for the name, let's use users. Then Supabase has enabled the row level security, but I'll come to this later. So ID will be the UUID for each user, which will be randomly generated. Then we have the created add property, which is a timestamp. Then let's add more properties as name. This will be a text property. Then let's add the image. This is also a text property. Then bio. This will be a text column. These will be null by default, but we will have an option to update all of these properties in the user profile section. So address, and finally we will have a phone number property column, and all of these will be text properties, and by default they will be null like this. So this is the users table, and if you scroll to top you will see an option enabled row level security. This is a security protection from a Supabase which allows the certain users to perform certain operations on this table. So we're gonna have to create some policies to be able to create or read data from this table. So let's click on this button, add RLS policy. This will take us to the policies section, and here we can create a policy for this table. So in the sidebar you can see we already have some predefined templates: enable row access for users, enable delete users based on the user ID. So we'll use this, and we will modify this so that uh, all the users can perform all the operations, but only for authenticated users. So I will select all of the actions. So if I click on this, and then for the target role I will use authenticated. So this means authenticated users will be able to select, insert, update or delete any data from this table. So this policy is done. So now we can add data into the users table, but because of this auth policy that we just created, but for now you can see the table is empty. So the way we want this to work is when we register the user using our application, we want to send some data that will also add him to the users table that we just created. But for now, if we just simply register any user, it won't appear instantly in the users table. So let me show you what I mean. So let's create a new account and hit sign up. So the account is created. So if I go to authentication, I will see two accounts, but if I go to the users table I won't see the new user here, and that's because we have to create some kind of trigger that will create a user into the users table. So we have to follow this guide. I found this very useful user management guide. So this will provide us a way to create a trigger that will create the user into users table every time a new user registered. So basically this creates a function and a trigger. So this is a function body. So this is a function body that creates the user into users table, and this is the trigger on auth schema. So Supabase has this auth schema where every authenticated user is stored. So if we switch the public schema with auth schema here, we will have this users table here. Here is all the authenticated users. So what we are doing is basically we are adding an event on this schema. So every time there is an insert in auth.users, we want to run this function so that it will store this user into our users table, and we can send this additional information in options.data, and we'll be able to fetch this data inside the function. But you will have to modify this SQL statement because in your case the table name and the column names can be different. So I've done this. I'll go to SQL editor and copy and paste my SQL statement here. So basically what this do is it will create a handle new user function which returns a trigger, and this is the function body. This will insert the user into public.users with the ID and the name, and we can get the name using the raw user metadata which we will pass from the front end using the sign up options. And then finally it will listen for the inserts in auth.users. So let's run this, and it successfully ran. Now we can see this trigger and the function into the database. So if I go into the functions here, we can see we have a new handle new user function which returns a trigger, and we can see this trigger as well if I go into the schema as auth. So there we go, we have a new trigger which listens for the user table, and after every insert it will create a new user into users table which is in the public schema. So let's delete all of the existing users and we will try this and see if this works. Let's delete this. Okay, so now we don't have any users, so let's just refresh our app, go into sign up, and let's create a new user as Sayed Nauman. So with the sign up, now we need to pass this additional name data as well, and we can pass some options and the data to fetch this inside the function. So we can provide option and then data object. Inside this we can pass additional data as name. So if I go into the user management guide, here you can see we can pass additional data like this, and we will be able to fetch this inside the function. So if I go into the SQL editor in here, and here you can see we are fetching the data from the new object basically is the new user object, and which contains all the user data, and we can fetch the name from raw user metadata. So if I click on sign up, now we have successfully created the user. And if I see in the Supabase, let's go into authentication. We see the new user here, and now if I go into the table editor, users, okay, there we go, we have the new user automatically inserted into the users table. We can see the user UUID and the name that we passed from the sign up function. So this is how we can use the trigger and the function. Now let's create one more user, Jon Snow, and hit sign up. So the user is created, and we can see it's inserted into the users table, and we can see this user into the authentication as well. Let me just refresh, and we can see both the users here. So our sign up functionality is working. Now we can remove this console log, and then move to the login component and then implement the login functionality. Let's go into the on submit function, and here first we need to trim the email and the password. So let's just copy them from the sign up component and paste them here. Now first we need to start the loading, so set the loading to true, and then we will get the response from the sign in function, and this will contain an error. We will import the Supabase client and then auth dot sign in with password, and this will receive an object with the email and the password. So let's use email password here, and console log the error if we have any. We'll also check if we got any error. We'll just alert the user. So let's make a condition here. If there is an error, let's use alert and show the login error as error dot message like this. Let's also make the loading false here after the API call. Now let's save this and test if the login is working, and if it's working we will see the error as null. So let's log into my account and hit login. Okay, so we see the error as null. That means the login is working, and if I change the wrong password, I will see this error, invalid login credentials. So that means our login functionality is working. Now we want to move to a home screen after we sign in or sign up. So let's create a new group of routes inside our app folder. Let's call it main, and inside this let's create a home component. Let's create a functional component and change the name to capital like this. So now we need to move the user to home screen whenever he logs in or registers, and for that Supabase has this auth listener which triggers every time when a user logs in, he registers, or when he signs out. So this is the code snippet for using this trigger. It's called on auth state change, and this gives us an event and a session which contains the user data, and we can show this in all the components, or we can redirect the user to home screen. But before we implement this, we need to store the user into a context so that we can use the user data in all the components. So let's create an auth context. And here first we will need to use the create context function from React. This will be our context, and now we need to create a provider. So let's export this auth provider. This will receive the children components, and here we will have a state for the user, and set user by default it will be null, and when it's null we will just move the user to welcome page, but if it's not then we will move the user to home page. Then we have this set auth function which will set the session of the user, and based on this session we will redirect the user to home screen. And then we will have another function set user data, and I will explain why I added this function but later. This will just take the user data and spread the data into the user state like this. So now let's provide all of these functions and the user state to all the children components. So auth context dot provider, and the value will be all of these functions. So user state, set auth, and set user data. Now let's close this and render all the children here. So this will wrap our entire application so that we can use this user state in all the components. Now let's recreate this use auth hook. This will use this context, and let's provide our auth context like this. So now we're gonna use this auth provider inside our root layout so that we can use this user state into our entire application. But before that we need to change this layout to main layout, because if you want to use the use auth hook we need to wrap our entire layout with this auth provider. So let's create a new layout, and inside this first we will return our auth provider, and that will wrap our entire stack, which is the main layout. And now in the main layout we'll be able to use the set auth, set user, or the user state from our context. So let's get the set auth function from our use auth hook. Use auth like this. Now to be able to use this we first gonna implement the auth listener, which triggers every time user logs in, and we already have that here. So we just need to copy this on auth state change function, the second one. So let's just copy this one, and we will need to create a use effect hook, and inside this we will register this. Let's just paste this here. So first we will need to import this Supabase client from lib/Supabase. So this is the auth listener which will trigger every time user logs in or he registers, or when he logs out. But in the session we get a user value. So let's just console log the session user and see if we are getting the user data. So let's save this, and you can see in the console the user session is undefined because we are currently logged out. But I want to make a condition here, so that if we get the session that means we need to go to the home screen. So if we have the session then we need to do two things: navigate to home screen and then set the authentication from this session. So set auth, and if we don't get this session then we need to set the auth as null, and we need to move to the welcome screen like this. So before we implement this, let's just if the session is working if we log in. So by default the session is session user is undefined, and if I try to log in, let's see what happens. Okay, if I log in you will see we got the session user, and this has all the user data from authentication. So I believe we should be getting the user ID. We can also see the user metadata, and we have the email and the name of the user. So this is the user ID, which is a unique hash. It's a UUID that we stored into the users table while we implemented the trigger and the function. So instead of showing this session user object, we can just display the user ID like this and save this. Not now. So now we can see the user ID. So now let's implement the authentication, and first we will need to set the auth as session.user, and we need to move to the home screen, and for that we will need to use the router. So let's create a router, use router hook from expo router. So we will replace the current route so that user cannot go back to this welcome page again. So we'll just replace it with home screen. And if there is no session, that means user just logged out, or there is no session. So we'll just set auth as null and replace the current route with the welcome. Okay. What's happening now? I think we made a mistake somewhere. Why it's started to move in a loop. Let's just close this. Everything looks fine, but maybe it was just a glitch from Food Superbase. I don't know. So let's just try to run this again and see if this works. Okay. So still the same error. And it's going in a loop. Let's review what did we do wrong. Oh, okay. So we need to add this empty array for the dependencies. So it was updating again and again, and that's why it was moving to the home screen in a loop. So let's see if this works this time. And now we move to home screen, and that's it. So we can't see the home text properly. So let's go to home, and here we need to import our screen wrapper like this, and we can see the home screen. So let me explain how all of this is working. When we opened the application, this Superbase auth listener triggered and we got the session. And when we have the session, we set the session and move the user from current screen to the home screen, and that's what happened. Now we don't have a way to go back, so let's create a button. This will be our logout button for now. So title will be logout, and on press will trigger on logout function. Let's create this function here, and first we will need to set auth as null. So let's get our set auth function from our use auth hook like this, and set auth as null. Then we're gonna call the sign out function from Superbase. So this will give us an error if there is any. So let's await for the Superbase dot auth, then sign out function. And if there is any error, we will check. If we got any error, we will just alert the user that we got an error signing out. So this will say logout and error signing out. Let's change this to sign out, and I save this. Now if I press on this button, we should go to the welcome page, and it's working. So basically when we logged out, this session got updated to undefined, then we set auth as null, then move to welcome page. So I just noticed we don't need this set auth here because we already setting auth as null here. So if I just refresh, we are still on the welcome page. So we still shortly see this index page because this is the first page of the application. So if I just comment this session logic, we will still see this welcome page, but I want to make this as a loading component. So whenever the session is being fetched from the Superbase auth listener, we will just show a loading state, and then once the session is fetched, we will move the user to either welcome or the home screen. So I'll just make everything into the center and then import our loading state and save this. Now this shows our loading. So if I uncomment the session logic here, I will move to welcome screen. So even if I refresh, we see the loading for a very small period of time, then we move to welcome or to the home screen. So now with this, our authentication system is complete. So let me check if everything's working. So let me just log in with my account. Okay, so I think the password is incorrect. So when we log in, we get the updated session into this auth listener and we display the user ID from the session here. And if I log out, this will update the session to undefined and we move back to welcome page, and this is working. Now let me log in one more time to see if we refresh the app or if we remove the application from recent apps, will it still persist the user? So let's see. If I refresh the app, we are still on the home screen, so session is working. And if I remove the app and open the expo app again, we are still on the home screen, and that's because Supabase uses async local storage to persist the user session, and whenever we open the application it triggers the on auth state function with the updated session. So that's why we are logged in. So with this we have done our Supabase setup, users and auth trigger and auth context as well. Now we're gonna work on creating all the tables and the policies in the Supabase, but before that let me show you one more issue. So if I console log the user data that we have into our context, so we can get the user from use auth, and if I console log this, basically we got this user from the session in the auth state listener, and this does not include all the properties that we defined into the users table. This has the email, the name and the sub property as the id, but we want all the information that we defined into the users table. So if I go to users, you will see we have the name, image, bio, email, address and the phone number. We need all of these properties to display in the user profile. So what we will do is when we get the session and move the user to home, we will call a function here that will fetch the updated user and then set it into the user state in our context. So that way we'll get all the user fields from the users table. So let's create this function here, and this will be an async function. It will receive the user from our session. So now we need a way to get the user from users table, and for that we can go into the services folder which we haven't created. So let's create a services folder, and inside this let's create our first service as the user service, and let's export a function const get user data. This will be an async function which will receive the user ID and we will get the user and we will return it from here. So first let's use try catch block, and if we get any error, we will console log the error as got error, and we will return a response as success as false and a message with the error message like this. So now we're gonna call the Supabase API to fetch the data from users table, and when we call this API, this will get us a data and an error in the response. So let's use Supabase client. Then using the form from function, we need to provide the users table. Basically we are getting the data from users table. So these functions are very easy to use. If you are an SQL developer, you'll get familiar with this very easily. But if you're not, here is the documentation for getting the data. You can use form select, you can select specific columns like name, you can query the reference data. So I'll provide this link into the video description, but for now we only need the user with the user ID. So what we can do is use the select function, then this will select the data from the users table, and if you want to apply a condition, we can use eq as the equal function. This will check if the ID is equal to the user ID that we're passing. Then this will give us an array of the data, but we want only single item, and we can use a single function to get the single object. Now let's see if we have any error. We will just return the error response from our catch block. Then if we don't get any error, we will return the success response. So let's return success as true. then data will be the data that we got from the API. So we are getting the data from users table, we are selecting the data, then we are checking the ID and we are getting the single item. So let's see if this is working. So let's get the response from this API, get user data, and we need to pass the user ID, which we can get on .id. Now let's console log this and see if we are getting the user data. Let's save this, and we can see in the console we got the user data at the bottom. uh, Data has address, bio, created at, email, ID, and the image. We have everything that we need. So now what we can do is we can remove this console, and first we will check if the success is true on the response. Then we will set the user data into the user state. So now we can import our set user data which we created earlier. I know we can use a set auth function for the same reason, but I created this different function because we're setting the user data, we're not setting the auth. So let's use this function here to set the auth state. But just to be clear, this doesn't make any difference. Even if you use this function or the set auth function, this will work the same. So now if we see in the console, we got the updated user, and this has the address, the bio, image, and the name of the user, and this is coming from the users table. This data does not include the session, but we only need these values to display in the user profile. So this is it for this video, and in the next video we're gonna work on the home section and we'll display all of this data into the user profile section. So see you in the next video.